Hey guys, tonight we begin with women choosing death by hanging over death by marriage. While you might imagine piracy as men's domain, the reality was women binding their breasts and slashing throats to escape the kitchen. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and let me know in the comments where you are tuning in from and what time it is for you. It is always fascinating to see who is joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Picture yourself as Anne Bonny in 1718, standing on the deck of a merchant ship you are about to plunder. Your breasts are bound flat beneath a stolen sailor's shirt. Your red hair is stuffed under a tricorn hat. Your voice is pitched low and rough from months of practice. In your hands is a cutlass still wet with blood from the last man who discovered you were female and thought that made you weak. He died learning otherwise. You are not supposed to exist. Women aren't allowed on pirate ships. It is considered bad luck, a distraction, a violation of maritime superstition. But you've been sailing and killing and stealing for months now, and most of the crew still thinks you are a man. The ones who know the truth keep silent because you are better with a blade than half the men aboard. And on a pirate ship, competence matters more than gender. At least until it doesn't. This is your escape. You escaped marriage to a man you despised. You escaped Ireland where your only options were wife, whore, or none. You escaped the kitchen, the spinning wheel, the endless domestic servitude that awaited every woman of your class. You chose this, the violence, the danger, the very real possibility of hanging, because even death by noose seemed preferable to slow death by domesticity. Let's start with how you became Anne Bonny, because your journey to piracy began with rejection of everything society said you should be. You were born around 1697 in County Cork, Ireland, illegitimate daughter of a lawyer named William Cormac and his housemaid Mary Brennan. Your father's wife discovers the affair, creates a scandal, ruins your father's legal practice. He flees Ireland with you and Mary, escaping to the Carolina colonies, to start over. In Charleston, your father prospers as a merchant and plantation owner. You grow up with wealth and privilege, but also with the stigma of illegitimacy following you everywhere. You are raised partly as a son. Your father has no legitimate male heirs, so he teaches you things girls aren't supposed to learn. You can ride, shoot, handle accounts. You are fierce, tempered, physically strong, quick with your fists. According to court records preserved in Charleston archives, you are involved in a stabbing incident as a teenager. You allegedly stab a servant girl with a knife during an argument. The details are murky, but the incident establishes your reputation for violence. Your father wants you to marry well, to secure an advantageous match that will erase the stain of your birth. Instead, at around age 16, you marry James Bonny, a small-time pirate and professional scoundrel. Your father is furious. He disowns you, cuts you off financially. You've traded wealth and respectability for a worthless man. And you don't even have the good sense to care. But James Bonny isn't your endgame. He is just your exit strategy from your father's house, from Charleston society, from the respectable life being forced on you. You and James go to Nassau in the Bahamas, the pirate republic, the one place in the Atlantic world where normal rules don't apply. Nassau in 1715 to 1720 is a lawless port filled with pirates, prostitutes, escaped slaves, naval deserters, and everyone else who doesn't fit anywhere in civilized society. There is no real government, no law enforcement beyond what pirates enforce themselves. Ships come and go freely, selling stolen goods, recruiting crews, celebrating successful raids. It is dangerous, filthy, and utterly free from the social constraints that govern everywhere else. You love it immediately. This is a place where nobody cares that you are illegitimate, that you married badly, that you are a woman who fights and curses and refuses to be domestic. In Nassau, you can be whoever you are strong enough to be. Your husband James turns informant for the colonial governor, betraying pirates for reward money. This makes him despised among the pirate community and makes you ashamed to be associated with him. You start an affair with John Calico Jack Rackham, a pirate captain with his own ship. Jack is charming, successful, everything James isn't. When James tries to reclaim you as his wife, you publicly reject him. Jack offers to buy you from James in a wife sale, a semi-legal practice where husbands sell their wives to other men. You find this transaction humiliating but pragmatic. You want out of your marriage, and this is the way out. But the sale falls through or doesn't happen the way it is supposed to. Accounts vary. What is clear is that you leave James for Jack and begin sailing with him. This is where your story as a pirate truly begins. Now here is the crucial question. When did you start disguising yourself as male? The historical record is frustratingly unclear. Some accounts say you sailed openly as a woman, that Calico Jack's crew knew you were female and accepted it. Other accounts say you disguised yourself as male for at least some of your piracy career. The truth is probably both. You were flexible, switching between presentations, depending on circumstances. According to testimony from captured merchant sailors documented in the Vice Admiralty Court of Jamaica records, you dressed in men's clothing during raids. When boarding merchant ships, you wore sailors' slops, loose trousers, a jacket, a neckerchief, and a hat pulled low. Your voice was already naturally low, and you roughened it further. You bound your breasts, probably with cloth strips wrapped tight around your chest, painful but effective. In the chaos and violence of a ship raid, nobody looked too closely. You were just another pirate with a cutlass and pistol. But back on your own ship among Calico Jack's crew, you were sometimes openly female. The crew knew. They accepted it because Jack was captain and you were his woman, and because you proved yourself useful, you could fight. You didn't panic during raids. You pulled your weight with ship maintenance and sailing. You were one of them, regardless of gender. This flexibility, being female when it suited you, male when necessary, gave you freedom that full-time disguise wouldn't have allowed. You could access male spaces and male freedoms without completely losing your identity as a woman. You were escaping gender constraints, not your gender itself. Let's talk about what it physically felt like to maintain male disguise during piracy, because the practical details matter. You are preparing for a raid, and you need to pass as male. First, the breast binding. You take long strips of linen or cotton cloth and wrap them around your chest, starting below your breasts and working up, pulling tight with each wrap. The goal is to flatten your chest into a masculine profile. The binding is intensely uncomfortable. It restricts your breathing. You can't take full deep breaths, which is problematic when you're about to engage in intense physical combat. It is hot. The Caribbean climate is already sweltering, and adding extra layers of tight cloth around your torso makes you overheat. It causes pain. The constant pressure on your ribs and breast tissue creates aching that intensifies the longer you wear the binding. Extended wear can cause bruising, skin breakdown, even rib damage, but the discomfort is worth it because it works. With your breasts flattened, loose men's clothing hides your body's curves. You are not trying to look perfectly male, just ambiguous enough that people don't look too closely. Next, your voice. Women's voices are typically higher pitched than men's due to shorter vocal cords. You can't permanently change your vocal anatomy, but you can change how you use your voice. You speak from your chest rather than your throat, dropping your pitch as low as it naturally goes. You roughen your voice, adding a rasp by slightly constricting your throat. You adopt masculine speech patterns, more cursing, more direct commands, less verbal hedging. According to linguistic research by Dr. Penelope Eckert at Stanford University, gendered speech patterns are largely learned social behaviors rather than biological inevitabilities. You are unlearning feminine speech and adopting masculine patterns deliberately. The voice work is exhausting. Maintaining an unnaturally low pitch for hours strains your vocal cords. You probably sound hoarse much of the time, but in a context where everyone's shouting over wind and waves, hoarseness doesn't stand out. Your movement and posture matter too. Women in the 18th century are trained from childhood to move in specific ways, small steps, contained gestures, taking up minimal space. You have to unlearn all of this. You swagger, you take wide strides, you stand with your legs apart rather than together, you gesture broadly, you take up space aggressively, the way men are taught to do. You probably rough up your hands deliberately, let them callous from rope work, maybe deliberately scar them in fights. Soft hands would mark you as feminine or as upper class, neither of which helps your disguise. Your face is fortunately ambiguous. You are young, probably late teens or early 20s during your piracy career. At that age, many men haven't developed full beards yet, so your smooth face doesn't immediately mark you as female. You keep your hair short or pinned up tightly under your hat. Dirt and sunburn help obscure your features' femininity. The disguise isn't perfect. Up close, people who know what to look for can probably tell. But in the chaos of pirate raids, in poor lighting, with everyone's attention on violence and plunder, you pass. And that is enough. Now let's meet Mary Red, because your story intersects with hers in one of history's most remarkable encounters. You are Anne Bonny, sailing with Calico Jack, and in 1720 your crew captures a merchant vessel. Among the prisoners is a young sailor who fights with unusual ferocity, who shows no fear even when facing pirate cutlasses. Jack offers the crew a choice: join us or be marooned. Several sailors join, including this fierce young one. You notice something odd about this new recruit: the way they move, the pitch of their voice, the shape of their body beneath loose sailors' clothing. You realize with shock, this sailor is female, disguising herself just as you sometimes do. You approach her privately, according to Captain Charles Johnson's A General History of the Pirates, published 1724, likely somewhat sensationalized but based on real accounts. You reveal your own sex to her, and she reveals hers to you. Her name is Mary Red. She has been living as male for years, long before joining a pirate crew. You are looking at a mirror of yourself. Another woman who chose male disguise as escape from feminine limitations. Let's dive into Mary Red's backstory, because her journey to piracy was even more complex than yours. You are Mary Red, born around 1685 in London, illegitimate daughter of a sea captain's widow. Your mother was pregnant with you when your father's ship was lost at sea. She already had one legitimate son from her marriage. When you are born, a girl, not the expected boy, your mother faces a problem. Your older legitimate brother dies in childhood. Your mother had been receiving financial support from her dead husband's mother, your paternal grandmother, for raising the grandson. With the grandson dead, the money will stop, unless your mother dresses you as a boy and presents you to your grandmother as the dead brother. The grandmother, old and perhaps not seeing clearly, accepts you as her grandson. The financial support continues. You spend your entire childhood living as male, called by your dead brother's name, trained to act like a boy. This isn't a game or a temporary disguise. This is your identity for years. You move like a boy, speak like a boy, think of yourself in male terms. When other children play, you play rough, like the boys do. You are probably more comfortable in male presentation than in female, because it is all you've known. As you grow older, the disguise becomes harder to maintain. Puberty brings breasts, hips, menstruation, physical changes that are increasingly difficult to hide. Your mother can't keep presenting you to your grandmother indefinitely. Eventually, the financial support ends, and you need to make your own way. You have skills from your male upbringing, but no legitimate way to use them. Women can't join most trades, so you continue the disguise. According to Johnson's account, you join the military, serving as a foot soldier and later as a cavalry trooper in Flanders during the War of Spanish Succession. You fight in battles. You are a competent soldier. Nobody suspects. You are female, but maintaining the disguise in military context is intensely difficult. You are living in close quarters with men, sleeping in barracks, changing clothes in shared spaces, urinating and defecating in communal latrines. You have to be constantly vigilant. One slip, one moment of carelessness, and you are exposed. You manage menstruation somehow, probably using cloth rags stuffed in your undergarments, changed when you can find privacy. You avoid situations where you'd be fully naked around other soldiers. You probably develop a reputation for being modest or private, which in an all-male military context might seem odd but not necessarily suspicious. You fall in love with a Flemish soldier, one of your fellow cavalry troopers. This creates an impossible situation. You want to be with him, but you can't approach him as a woman while disguised as male, and you can't reveal your sex without ruining your military career and facing possible prosecution. Johnson's account says you eventually reveal yourself to him privately, and he is shocked but intrigued. You marry him and leave the military, finally living openly as a woman. You and your husband open an inn called the Three Horseshoes near Breda in the Netherlands. For a brief period, you are living a conventional life, woman, wife, innkeeper. But your husband dies after just a few years of marriage. The inn fails without him. You are widowed, alone, broke, and back to having no good options as a woman, so you return to what worked before, male disguise. You dress as a man again and join a ship bound for the West Indies. The ship is captured by pirates. You are given the choice: join the pirates or die. You join, and that is how you become a pirate under the name of a male sailor. When Anne Bonny discovers your sex, she is meeting someone who has far more experience with gender disguise than she does. You've lived as male for most of your life. You are not escaping femininity temporarily. You've built an entire existence around male presentation. For you, being female is almost the disguise, something you put on briefly during your marriage and then discarded when it stopped being useful. Now we have two women on Calico Jack's pirate ship, both gender non-conforming, both lethal with weapons, both completely uninterested in the domestic lives society insists women should want. According to trial testimony, both of you participate actively in raids. You board merchant ships alongside male pirates. You fight with cutlasses and pistols. You threaten prisoners, steal cargo, and commit all the violent acts that define piracy. Let's examine a specific raid in detail, because understanding the violence makes the gender transgression more visceral. You are Anne Bonny, and it is October 1720. Calico Jack's sloop has spotted a merchant vessel off the coast of Jamaica. It is evening, approaching dark. Jack decides to attack at night, when the merchant crew will be less prepared. Your crew approaches silently, no light showing. When you are close enough, someone fires a warning shot, and Jack shouts the command to heave to. The merchant ship, outgunned and surprised, tries to flee. That is when the real violence begins. Your crew fires a broadside, cannon shot ripping through the merchant ship's rigging and hull. Wood splinters everywhere. Men scream. The merchant ship's captain realizes he can't escape and strikes his colors, surrendering. You board with the first wave. You've bound your breasts, dressed in men's clothing, armed yourself with a cutlass and pistol as you swing over to the merchant ship's deck. Your heart is pounding with excitement and fear. This is the moment of maximum danger. The merchant crew might fight back, might kill you before you can kill them, but they don't fight. They're terrified, unarmed, surrendering. Your job now is to secure the prisoners and search for valuables. You hold a pistol on a group of sailors while other pirates search the ship. One sailor looks at you oddly. Maybe he notices something feminine about your face or voice. You step closer and press the pistol barrel against his forehead. "You have something to say?" you ask in your rough, low voice. He shakes his head, terrified. You are female, but you are also holding a loaded gun, and that is what matters. The raid yields some cargo cloth, rum, a bit of money, nothing spectacular but enough to make it worthwhile. No one was killed this time. The merchant crew is relieved of valuables and left alive, grateful to survive the encounter. Your crew sails away into the night. This is your life now. Not every raid is this clean. Sometimes crews resist and people die. Sometimes you are the one killing them. You've crossed a line that women aren't supposed to cross, engaging in lethal violence, not in self-defense but as aggression, as theft, as assertion of power. According to testimony from captured merchant sailors recorded in the Jamaica Vice Admiralty court proceedings, both you and Mary Red were particularly fierce during raids. One witness, Dorothy Thomas, testified that when Calico Jack's ship was finally captured, Anne Bonny and Mary Red wore men's jackets and long trousers and handkerchiefs tied about their heads, and that each of them had a machete and pistol in their hands. Another witness, a French sailor named Peter Cornelian, testified that during a raid both women cursed and swore at the men to murder the prisoners, and that they were very active on board and willing to do anything. Whether these testimonies are entirely accurate or exaggerated to make the story more sensational is unclear. But they establish that you and Mary were visibly actively involved in pirate violence, not passive passengers or hidden stowaways. Let's talk about the other women who chose similar paths, because you and Mary Red weren't unique. You were just the most famous. Female pirates existed throughout maritime history. The records are sparse because most successfully maintained their disguises and were never exposed. There is Jacquot de la Haye, a Haitian pirate of the mid-negative 17th century. According to Caribbean oral histories compiled by historian Dr. Chris Lane at Tulane University, Jacquot was a red-haired woman who faked her own death to escape pursuers, then returned to piracy, disguised as a man using the name Back from the Dead Red. The historical evidence for her existence is thin. She might be more legend than fact, but the legend persists because it is powerful. A woman so committed to piracy that she staged her own death and returned in disguise. There is Anne du Leviut, a French buccaneer operating in the Caribbean around the 1660s to 1680s. Anne was unusual in that she didn't disguise her sex. She was openly female, but so fierce that male pirates accepted her. According to documented accounts in French colonial records, she challenged a famous buccaneer named Laurens de Graaf to a duel after he killed her husband. Laurens refused to fight a woman, so Anne shamed him publicly until he agreed to marry her instead. They became a pirate power couple, raiding Spanish ships together. Anne commanded her own crews and participated in major raids, including the sack of Veracruz in 1683. There is Qing Shi, a Chinese pirate who commanded a fleet of hundreds of ships in the early 19th century. Qing Shi wasn't escaping gender through disguise. She was wielding power so absolute that gender became irrelevant. She inherited the pirate fleet when her husband died and proceeded to expand it into the largest pirate organization in history. At her peak, she commanded over 300 junks and 20,000 to 40,000 pirates. She established a code of laws for her fleet, negotiated with the Chinese government, and eventually retired with wealth and a pardon. Qing Shi proved that women could wield massive maritime power without pretending to be men, if they were ruthless and competent enough. There is Grace O'Malley Greene Mahol, an Irish pirate and clan leader of the 16th century. Grace commanded ships, led raids against English coastal towns, and negotiated directly with Queen Elizabeth I. She was openly female but operated in a Gaelic Irish context where women could inherit chieftainship and command troops. When English officials tried to diminish her by referring to her as merely the wife of a clan leader, she corrected them sharply. She was the leader. She commanded respect through force of personality and military success. These women showed different strategies for navigating the male-dominated world of piracy. Some, like you and Mary Red, use disguise. Others, like Andrew Levute and Grace O'Malley, were openly female, but so competent and fierce that men accepted them anyway. Others, like Ching She, accumulated such overwhelming power that gender became irrelevant to their authority. What united all of you was rejection of domestic femininity. None of you wanted to be wives in conventional marriages, mothers raising children, keepers of households. You all chose violence and freedom over safety and respectability. And you all understood that the price of that choice might be death. Let's examine the specific legal and social status of women in the early 18th century, because understanding what you escaped makes your choice more meaningful. You are born female in the Atlantic world around 1700. Your legal status is coverture, the legal doctrine that a woman's legal existence is absorbed into her husband's upon marriage. You cannot own property independently. You cannot sign contracts. You cannot keep your own wages if employed. You cannot obtain divorce except through expensive parliamentary petition. You cannot vote or hold office. You are legally a possession, first of your father, then of your husband. Your economic options are severely limited. Respectable women can be wives, nuns, or governesses, ladies' companions. Less respectable options include prostitution, thievery, or begging. There are some trades women can enter: brewing, textile work, midwifery, but these are poorly paid and offer minimal independence. Marriage is the only real path to security. But marriage means subordination to a husband who can legally beat you, rape you, and control every aspect of your life. Your education is limited. Most women are illiterate. Even wealthy women receive only basic education focused on accomplishments like music and needlework, rather than practical or intellectual skills. You are taught to be decorative, obedient, and useful in domestic contexts. Your sexuality is rigidly controlled. Premarital sex can ruin you socially and economically. Pregnancy outside marriage makes you unemployable in respectable contexts and often forces you into prostitution or workhouses. Contraception is unreliable and dangerous. You have no legal right to refuse sex within marriage. Your physical movement is restricted. Respectable women don't travel alone, don't go to taverns or public spaces without male escort. Don't engage in physical activity beyond light walking. Your clothing, corsets, heavy skirts, delicate shoes is designed to restrict movement. You are supposed to be decorative and stationary, and if you violate these norms, if you are too loud, too sexual, too independent, too physical, you can be labelled as a scold, a whore, a witch. You can be punished through public shaming rituals, prosecution, or institutionalization. There is no socially acceptable way to be a woman who doesn't want conventional feminine life. This is the world you are escaping when you become a pirate. Piracy offers what legitimate society cannot: physical freedom, economic independence, adventure, power, escape from forced domesticity, and reproduction. Yes, it also offers violence, danger, and high probability of early death. But for women like you and Mary Red, that trade-off is worthwhile. According to gender historian Dr. Margaret Hunt at Amherst College, the 18th century Atlantic world produced a small but persistent population of gender, non-conforming women who found spaces military, maritime, criminal, where they could live in male disguise and access male privileges. These women weren't necessarily transgender in the modern sense, though some might have been. They were pragmatically escaping legal and social disabilities of femininity through strategic gender performance. Now let's talk about the physical realities of life on a pirate ship, because romance and reality diverge sharply. You are living in cramped, filthy conditions. The ship is small. Sloops like Calico Jacks are typically 40 to 60 feet long, carrying crews of 40 to 80 pirates. Space is at a premium. You sleep in hammocks, strung below deck, swaying with the ship's movement, with dozens of other bodies packed close. Privacy is non-existent. The smell is overwhelming. unwashed bodies. Bathing is rare because fresh water is precious. Bilge water rotting in the ship's bottom. Salt tar, gunpowder. The latrine is a seat hung over the side of the ship, meaning you defecate directly into the ocean while being visible to anyone who looks. Urination is equally public. Men piss over the side. And if you are disguised as male, you have to figure out how to do the same without exposing your anatomy. You probably develop urinary tract infections from holding your bladder too long, from dehydration, from poor hygiene. Menstruation is managed with rags that can't be properly cleaned. You probably experience irregular periods due to poor nutrition and physical stress, which actually helps with maintaining disguise. Fewer periods means less to hide. Food is awful. Hardtack rock, hard biscuits full of weevils, salt pork or beef, preserved to the point of being nearly inedible, dried peas, whatever fish you can catch. Fresh food runs out quickly, and scurvy becomes a threat on long voyages. You are often hungry, always thirsty, because water rations are limited, and what water you have is stale and brackish. Disease is constant dysentery from contaminated water, fevers from mosquito-borne illnesses picked up in port, skin infections from constant dampness and poor hygiene, dental problems because everyone's teeth are rotting from poor nutrition and no dental care. You are probably in chronic low-level pain from various untreated infections and injuries. Violence among the crew is common. Pirates fight each other over petty disputes. Discipline is brutal, flogging, marooning, or execution for serious infractions. The life expectancy of a pirate is short. Most die in their 20s or early 30s from violence, disease, or hanging. And yet this is still freedom compared to your alternatives. On this ship, you can move freely, speak your mind, fight, steal, live without a husband controlling you. The suffering is worth it because the alternative is a different kind of suffering with no compensation of freedom. Let's examine the moment of your capture, because this is where your story reaches its crisis. It is October 1720. Calico Jack's sloop is anchored off the coast of Jamaica near Negril Point. Most of the crew is drunk. You've just captured a fishing boat carrying rum, and everyone's celebrating. You and Mary Red are among the few who remain relatively sober. A pirate hunter sloop commanded by Captain Jonathan Barnett approaches. Someone finally notices and raises the alarm, but it is too late and most of the crew is too drunk to fight effectively. Barnett's crew boards. Most of Calico Jack's pirates flee below deck or surrender immediately. Jack himself hides below deck, too drunk or cowardly to fight, but you and Mary Red stand and fight. According to testimony from Barnett's crew, you two stay on deck, firing pistols and swinging cutlasses at the boarders. You scream at your crewmates to come up and fight. Mary Red fires down the hatch into the hold, reportedly shouting, "If there is a man among ye, ye'll come up and fight like the man ye are to be." You are wearing men's clothing, but in the chaos, maybe your hat has come off. Maybe someone sees your face clearly. It doesn't matter now. You are fighting to kill or be killed, but you are outnumbered and outmatched. Barnett's crew overwhelms you. You are captured, jailed. The entire crew is taken to Jamaica to stand trial for piracy. And this is when your sex becomes a central issue. Up to now, you could be ambiguous, could move between presentations. But in a courtroom, under legal scrutiny, your body is examined and your sex is officially determined. You are declared legally female, as is Mary Red. This changes everything about how your trial proceeds. Piracy is a capital crime, and most of Calico Jack's crew will hang. But you have an option they don't. You can plead your belly. Pleading the belly is a legal mechanism that allows pregnant women to delay execution until after giving birth. The logic is that the unborn child is innocent and shouldn't be executed for the mother's crimes. In practice, It often means the woman escapes execution entirely because by the time she gives birth and recovers, authorities have moved on to other concerns or the political will to execute her has dissipated. You and Mary Red both claim to be pregnant. A jury of matrons, 12 women sworn to examine you, confirms that both of you are indeed pregnant. Execution is postponed. Whether you are actually pregnant or whether you faked it somehow is unclear. Pregnancy is difficult to confirm in early stages without modern testing. The matrons would examine your belly for swelling, your breasts for changes, maybe ask about menstruation. You could potentially fake these signs, especially if you'd recently been pregnant or were in very early pregnancy. Or you might genuinely be pregnant. You've been having sex with Calico Jack, and Mary Red might have been having sex with other crew members. Though accounts vary, the pregnancy reprieve saves your lives at least temporarily. The rest of the crew is hanged on the 18th of November, 1720. Calico Jack and the male pirates are executed at Gallows Point in Port Royal. According to historical accounts, you visit Jack in prison before his execution. He reportedly asks for forgiveness or expresses love. You allegedly respond coldly, telling him that if he had fought like a man, he need not have been hanged like a dog. This quote may be apocryphal. It appears in Captain Johnson's sensationalized history, but it captures your character as history remembers you, fierce, unforgiving, contemptuous of weakness. Jack and the others hang. Their bodies are displayed in iron cages as warning to other pirates. But you and Mary Red remain in prison, pregnant, waiting. Mary Red dies in prison in April 1721. The cause is listed as fever possibly related to childbirth or possibly from prison conditions. Her child, if it existed, dies with her or shortly after. She is buried in Jamaica, probably in an unmarked grave. Her life of gender escape ends in a prison cell, but at least she dies free from domesticity, having lived on her own terms. And you, Anne Bonny, you disappear from the historical record. There is no record of your execution. There is no record of your death in prison. You simply vanish from documented history. Some historians speculate that your wealthy father bought your freedom, that you returned to Charleston under a new name and lived quietly. Others think you died in prison and the death simply wasn't recorded. Still others believe you escaped and resumed piracy or lived in disguise elsewhere. The lack of closure is frustrating but somehow appropriate. You lived in ambiguity between genders, between legal and illegal, between history and legend. Your ending is equally ambiguous. Lost to time. Let's examine the trial transcript in detail because the legal proceedings reveal how society processed the idea of women pirates. The trial takes place at the Admiralty Court in Spanish Town, Jamaica, on the 28th of November, 1720. You and Mary Red stand accused of piracy, robbery, and other felonies on the high seas. The court is shocked by your sex. The judges, the spectators, the witnesses, everyone is disturbed by the sight of women accused of violent piracy. The prosecutor emphasizes your gender repeatedly, calling you these women with visible distaste. The implication is clear. Piracy is bad enough, but female piracy is unnatural, monstrous, a violation of divine and natural order beyond mere criminality. Witnesses testify about your behavior during raids. Dorothy Thomas, a woman who was aboard a ship you attacked, testifies that she knew them both a considerable time and that they wore men's clothes and were both very profligate, cursing and swearing much, and very ready and willing to do anything on board. She states that when she asked why you dressed and acted as men, you had no good answer except that it allowed you to participate in piracy. Another witness, Thomas Dillon, testifies that during a raid, you and Mary Red were both on deck when the ship was taken, and that they had each of them a pistol and cutlass, and were both very active in the attack. He emphasizes your willingness to use violence, your competence with weapons, your complete lack of feminine softness, or mercy. The prosecution argues that you are guilty not just of piracy, but of gender transgression, of violating natural law by dressing as men and engaging in masculine violence. You've usurped male privileges, invaded male spaces, and committed male crimes. The prosecutor seems almost more offended by your gender performance than by your actual piracy. Your defense is minimal. You don't deny the acts. You can't too many witnesses saw you. Instead, you claim you were forced into piracy, that you participated under duress. This is a common pirate defense, and rarely works, but it is your only option. The jury deliberates briefly and finds you guilty. The judge sentences you to hang. But then you plead your belly. The matrons confirm pregnancy, and execution is postponed. You've bought time, though. Whether it ultimately saves you is unknown. The trial transcript, preserved in Jamaican colonial records, reveals deep societal anxiety about women like you. You are not just criminals. You are category violators. People who don't fit into the gender system society depends on. The legal system doesn't quite know how to process you. It can condemn you, imprison you, sentence you to death, but it can't make sense of you. According to legal historian Dr. Marcus Rediker at the University of Pittsburgh, female pirates represented a profound threat to patriarchal order. They proved that women could do men's work, could survive and thrive without male protection, could be violent and competent and free. This threatened the ideological foundations of gender hierarchy. If women could be successful pirates, what other male privileges were actually accessible to women? What other gendered restrictions were arbitrary rather than natural? The authorities had to suppress not just you as individuals, but what you represented. Your execution would be symbolic, a demonstration that women who violated gender norms would be destroyed. Your disappearance from the record might be equally symbolic, an erasure, a refusal to acknowledge that women like you could exist. Let's talk about the women who cross-dressed for other reasons in the same era, because you are part of a broader phenomenon. Military records from the 18th century occasionally reveal women who served as soldiers or sailors in male disguise, discovered only when wounded or killed. Hannah Snell served in the British Army and Royal Marines from 1745 to 1750, disguised as James Gray. She fought in multiple battles, was wounded at least once, and maintained her disguise for 5 years. When she finally revealed her sex, she became a minor celebrity, giving public performances in her uniform and publishing a memoir. Unlike you, Hannah found a way to profit from her gender transgression after the fact, though she had to present it as patriotic service rather than personal freedom seeking. Deborah Sampson served in the American Continental Army during the Revolutionary War under the name Robert Shirtliff. She fought for over a year before being discovered when wounded. Like Hannah Snell, she later gave public lectures about her experiences and received a military pension. Christian Davies served as a soldier in the British Army during the War of Spanish Succession, fighting alongside her husband, who didn't initially know she was female. When her husband died in battle, she continued serving, maintaining her disguise for years. She was eventually discovered when wounded, but received a pension and some recognition for her service. These women's experiences paralleled Mary Read's military service. They all discovered that male disguise gave access to adventure, income, and freedom that legitimate feminine life couldn't offer. They all maintained disguises in extremely difficult circumstances, living in close quarters with men, managing menstruation and hygiene in secret, constantly vigilant against exposure. But there is a key difference between military cross-dressers and pirate cross-dressers. Military women who were discovered could sometimes be reintegrated into society as patriotic curiosities. They served the state so the state could forgive their gender transgression and even celebrate it as exceptional loyalty. But pirate women served no state. You were criminals, and your gender transgression compounded your criminality rather than excusing it. According to historian Dr. Diane Dugal at the University of Oregon, the 18th century produced hundreds of documented cases of female to male cross-dressers, and likely thousands more that went unrecorded because the disguises were never discovered. These women found cracks in the gender system, spaces where disguise was possible, where male privilege was worth the risk of discovery, where freedom mattered more than safety. Now let's examine the psychology of long-term gender disguise, because the mental experience matters as much as the physical. You are Mary Red, and you've been living as male for most of your life. At what point does the disguise stop feeling like a disguise and start feeling like your identity? When you were a child, you were told you were a boy, treated as a boy, raised to act like a boy. Your understanding of yourself was shaped by this. Then at some point, puberty, probably you learned the truth. Your body was female, but your identity, your sense of self, had been built around maleness. Modern psychology would recognize this as a complex gender identity situation. You might identify as male, as female, as something in between, or as simply yourself, with gender being less relevant than individual personhood. 18th century language didn't have terms for these experiences, but the experiences existed anyway. When you dress as male, are you putting on a costume or expressing your true self? When you are forced to present as female during your brief marriage, is that liberation or another disguise? The historical record can't answer these questions because nobody thought to ask them, but they matter for understanding who you were. Some modern scholars interpret women like you as transgender men, people whose gender identity was male regardless of birth sex. Others see you as women pragmatically accessing male privilege while still identifying as female. Still others think gender identity is anachronistic when applied to the past, that you wouldn't have conceptualized yourself in those terms at all. What is clear is that you were more comfortable living as male than as female. You chose male presentation repeatedly across your life, returning to it whenever you needed to survive or thrive. Whether that is because you identified as male, or because male presentation was simply more useful, or some combination of both, is something only you could have answered. According to gender studies scholar Dr. Jen Mannion at Amherst College, applying modern transgender frameworks to historical figures is both useful and problematic. Useful because it reveals that gender diversity isn't new, that people have been living outside the gender binary for centuries. Problematic because historical people didn't have access to modern terminology and might not have understood themselves the way we understand them. The truth is probably that you were navigating gender in ways that made sense in your specific context, ways that don't map neatly onto either historical or modern categories. Let's examine the sexual dynamics on pirate ships, because sex and gender are intertwined in your story. Calico Jack's crew knew you were female. They knew Mary Red was female. How did this affect sexual dynamics? Pirate ships generally prohibited women because they were seen as sexually disruptive. Men would fight over women. Jealousy would destroy crew cohesion. But you were simultaneously female and Jack's exclusive sexual partner, which created a complicated situation. Other crew members couldn't approach you sexually without challenging Jack's authority. You were protected by Jack's power, not by your own gender presentation. Mary Red's situation is less clear. Some accounts suggest she had a sexual relationship with a male crew member, though details are murky. If she was presenting as male most of the time, did this relationship involve her revealing her sex to him privately? Or was it a same-sex relationship as far as outsiders knew? There were also probably sexual relationships between male crew members. Maritime historians have documented that same-sex sexual activity was common on ships with all male crews. Whether anyone knew about or cared about Mary Red's sex in that context is unclear. The sexual ethics of pirate crews were generally more flexible than legitimate societies. Pirates already operated outside social norms, so sexual nonconformity was less shocking among them than it would be elsewhere. There are documented cases of pirate crews accepting openly gay or cross-dressing members. though this acceptance had limits and could turn to violence if someone was seen as disrupting crew function. According to maritime historian Dr. Berg at Arizona State University, pirate ships were spaces of sexual flexibility, where relationships that would be prosecuted on land were tolerated at sea. This doesn't mean pirates were progressive about gender or sexuality. They weren't, but they were pragmatic. If someone was useful to the crew, their sexual or gender nonconformity might be overlooked. For you, Anne Bonny, being female and openly sexual with Calico Jack might have actually made you less threatening to crew dynamics than if you'd been trying to hide your sex. Everyone knew the situation. You were Jack's woman, off limits to others, but also a competent pirate in your own right. The arrangement worked until it didn't. Now, let's talk about the physical combat skills you needed to survive as a pirate. Because competence with violence was essential to maintaining your position, you need to know how to use a cutlass, a short, heavy sword designed for close combat on ship decks. The cutlass is a slashing weapon, not a thrusting one. You swing it hard, aiming for limbs, necks, anywhere you can cause disabling damage. It is heavy, requires upper body strength to wield effectively, and creates brutal injuries. You practice constantly on a pirate ship. There is downtime between raids and crew members practice fighting to maintain skills and settle disputes. You probably train with male crew members, learning techniques, building strength and speed. Your female body has less upper body strength than male bodies on average, so you compensate with speed, technique, and ruthlessness. You also need to know how to use pistols. Flintlock pistols are standard pirate weapons. Loading is slow. Pour powder down the barrel, tamp down a ball and wadding, prime the pan, cock the hammer. In combat, you get maybe 1 or 2 shots before you are fighting hand to hand. You need to make those shots count. You practice aiming, practice loading quickly. Practice not flinching when the powder flashes near your face. You need physical fitness, core strength for balance on a moving deck, grip strength for climbing rigging and holding weapons, cardiovascular endurance for the intense physical exertion of combat. You build this through ship work, hauling ropes, climbing masts, maintaining sails. Pirate ships didn't have specialized labor. Everyone did physical work, which kept you strong. You need to manage fear. Combat is terrifying. People are trying to kill you. You have to act anyway. Push through the fear. Function under stress. You probably develop a combat mindset, a psychological state where you are hyper-focused, reactive, not thinking too much about consequences. This is how soldiers function in battle, and you are essentially a soldier on a floating battlefield. You need pain tolerance. You are probably injured repeatedly. Cuts, bruises, maybe broken bones. You keep fighting through pain because stopping means death. You develop a tolerance for physical suffering that would horrify civilians. And you need ruthlessness. You need to be willing to kill, to hurt people who haven't personally wronged you, to do violence for profit. This is a moral line that most people can't cross. You cross it, and it changes you. According to military psychology research by Dr. Dave Grossman, most humans have deep psychological resistance to killing other humans. Overcoming this resistance requires either intense training, situational factors that make killing seem necessary, or psychological traits that make someone naturally less empathetic. You probably had some combination of all 3 desperate circumstances that made piracy seem necessary: a temperament that was naturally aggressive or less empathetic than average, and lived experience that trained you to violence. Let's examine what happened to female pirates who were discovered and tried in different contexts because outcomes varied. In England, several women were tried for piracy or maritime crimes in the 18th century. Most were executed if convicted, though some pleaded their belly successfully like you did. Mary Harvey was tried for piracy in 1726 in England. She'd been living as a male sailor named William Chandler for years. When discovered, she was tried, convicted, and hanged. She is less famous than you because her story didn't capture public imagination the same way, but her outcome was probably more typical discovery, trial, execution, obscurity. Mary Ann Talbot served in the British Navy as John Taylor in the 1790s. She was wounded multiple times, lost some of her toes to frostbite, and eventually was discovered when seeking medical treatment. Unlike Mary Harvey, she wasn't prosecuted, she was serving the state, so her cross-dressing was treated as patriotic eccentricity rather than crime. She received a pension and spent her later years exhibiting herself as a curiosity, wearing her uniform and telling her story for money. The difference in outcomes often came down to whether the woman was serving state interests or opposing them. Military women could be reintegrated as exceptional patriots. Pirate women were unredeemable criminals. There is also a racial dimension that is important to acknowledge. You and Mary Red were white women, which gave you some social capital even as criminals. There were also women of colour who became pirates or maritime outlaws, but they faced additional prosecution and violence because of race. Black women pirates existed. Some were formerly enslaved people who escaped via piracy, but they were even less likely to be recorded in history or shown mercy when captured. According to historian Dr. Chris Lane, the Caribbean pirate world included people of many races and backgrounds. Pirate crews were often racially integrated in ways that legitimate society wasn't. Though racism still existed within pirate culture, some of the fiercest pirates were formerly enslaved black people who had every reason to wage war on the society that had enslaved them. Their stories are largely lost because they were even more marginalized than white pirates. Now let's talk about the economic realities of piracy, because you weren't doing this purely for abstract freedom. You were also doing it for money. A successful pirate could make more in one raid than a legitimate sailor made in a year. Prize ships yielded cargo, silk, spices, sugar, rum, manufactured goods that could be sold for significant profit. Splitting the proceeds among the crew could give each pirate a substantial sum. But piracy was also economically unstable. Many raids yielded little. Long periods without successful captures meant the crew had no income. Money had to be spent in port on supplies, repairs, and entertainment. Pirates were notoriously bad at saving. They tended to spend all their money on drinking, gambling, and prostitutes. Then go back to sea broke. You probably made and spent significant sums during your piracy career. When you had money, you could live well by working class standards, good food, nice clothes, leisure time. When you were broke, you were desperate. The boom and bust cycle of pirate economics meant you were sometimes rich and sometimes starving, with little in between. There is also the question of what you would have done with sustained wealth if you'd had it. You couldn't invest in legitimate businesses without revealing your criminal background. You couldn't retire to a comfortable domestic life, because that is exactly what you were escaping. Your only real option for using wealth was to keep pirating more comfortably, or to disappear entirely with enough money to start over somewhere else. According to economic historian Dr. Virginia Anderson at the University of Colorado, pirates operated in a maritime economy where wealth was incredibly unstable. A successful merchant could build sustained wealth through trade and investment. A pirate could get rich quickly but had no legitimate way to preserve that wealth. This made piracy attractive to people who needed money immediately, but had no long-term economic security. Let's examine the daily routine on a pirate ship when you are not actively raiding. Because violence was only occasional, most days were mundane ship maintenance. You wake at dawn because everyone wakes at dawn on a ship. You need to take advantage of daylight. You sleep in a hammock below deck, packed close to other bodies. In the Caribbean heat, below deck is stifling. You are already sweating when you wake. Your first task is usually ship maintenance. Ships require constant work to remain seaworthy. You might be assigned to pump the bilges, clearing the foul water that accumulates in the ship's bottom. This is miserable work, repetitive and disgusting, but necessary. Or you might work on the rigging, checking ropes for wear, replacing damaged lines, adjusting sails. This work requires climbing, which is dangerous. Falls from rigging kill sailors regularly. Mid-morning there is a meal hardtack, maybe some salt pork, watered rum. You eat quickly and get back to work. More maintenance, or maybe lookout duty if it is your turn. Standing at the masthead for hours, scanning the horizon for potential prizes or threats. It is boring but important. Missing a sail could mean missing a capture, or being captured yourself. Afternoon brings more work or perhaps gunnery practice. The crew practices loading and firing the cannons, maintaining readiness for combat. This is loud, hot, dangerous work. Cannons misfire sometimes, killing crew members, but practiced gun crews can fire faster and more accurately, which matters in combat. Evening brings another meal and then personal time. This is when crew members gamble, tell stories, drink if there is alcohol available. You might participate in these social activities, might keep to yourself, might practice weapons skills. The crew is your community by necessity, but that doesn't mean you are close to all of them. Night brings sleep, or night watch if it is your turn. Someone always has to be watching, steering, maintaining course. The ship never stops needing attention. This is your life most days. Work, eat, sleep, repeat. Piracy is less about adventure and more about being a working sailor on a ship that occasionally commits crimes. The violence is extraordinary but occasional. The labour is ordinary and constant. According to maritime labour historian Dr. Marcus Rediker, sailors' work in the 18th century was brutal regardless of whether the ship was legitimate merchant, naval, or pirate. Long hours, dangerous conditions, poor food, harsh discipline. Pirate ships were often somewhat better than merchant or naval ships, more democratic governance, better food distribution, less extreme discipline, but they were still fundamentally hard physical labour in awful conditions. Now let's examine the moment of existential crisis that probably came at some point in your piracy career. You are Anne Bonny, and you are sitting on deck late at night during your watch. The Caribbean is calm, stars overhead, ship rocking gently. You have a moment of quiet introspection. You think about what your life has become. You are a wanted criminal. You've killed people, maybe not personally delivered fatal blows, but participated in raids where people died. You are living in filth and danger. You'll probably die young, either in combat or on the gallows. Was it worth it? You escaped a bad marriage, escaped your father's control, escaped the domestic life that was suffocating you. You are free in ways women aren't supposed to be free. You can fight, travel, make your own choices, but you are also exhausted, in chronic pain from injuries and poor living conditions, afraid of capture, unable to ever return to legitimate society. If you had it to do over, would you make the same choices? There is no good answer. Your alternatives were all bad abusive marriage, poverty, prostitution, slow death in domesticity. Piracy is also a form of slow death, just faster and more violent. You chose between different kinds of suffering and different kinds of freedom. Maybe you feel regret, maybe you feel pride. Probably you feel both, and exhaustion, and determination to keep going because stopping isn't an option. You've crossed lines you can't uncross. You are committed now, for better or worse. This kind of reflection probably came during quiet moments, and you probably tried not to think about it too much, because dwelling on existential questions doesn't help you survive. You focus on the immediate, the next raid, the next port, the next day. Long-term thinking is a luxury you can't afford. According to psychological research on people in extreme circumstances, humans are remarkably good at normalizing whatever situation they're in. You probably stopped thinking of your life as extraordinary and just lived it as your normal. The violence, the disguise, the danger, all just routine after a while. This psychological adaptation helps you function, but also disconnects you from the enormity of what you are doing. Let's talk about what happened to the concept of female pirates in popular culture after your story became known. because you became a legend that shaped how people imagined women and piracy. Captain Charles Johnson's A General History of the Pirates 1724 included a sensationalized account of your story and Mary Ridd's. This book was widely read and reprinted, shaping public understanding of piracy for generations. Johnson's account emphasizes the shocking gender transgression, woman doing men's violence, wearing men's clothes, rejecting feminine domesticity. His narrative is partly historical, partly moralistic cautionary tale, partly titillating fantasy. He is simultaneously horrified by and fascinated with you. Later writers built on Johnson's account. You appear in novels, plays, poems, histories. Often your story is moralized. You are punished for transgressing gender norms, shown as a warning to other women. Sometimes you are romanticized, turned into a tragic figure, a woman destroyed by love or passion. Rarely are you portrayed as simply competent and pragmatic, making rational choices about how to survive in a world that gave you few options. In the 20th and 21st centuries, you become a feminist icon of sorts, a woman who refused patriarchal constraints, who seized masculine power and freedom. This interpretation is more sympathetic, but still somewhat romanticized. It tends to downplay the violence, the desperation, the extremely limited options that made piracy seem appealing. Modern portrayals in movies, books, and games often feature female pirates, directly or indirectly inspired by your story. These portrayals range from historically grounded to pure fantasy. Some show the real difficulties of gender disguise and maritime violence. Others present sanitized adventure, where being a female pirate is fun and empowering without significant cost. According to popular culture scholar Dr. Rebecca Simon at Santa Monica College, Anne Bonny and Mary Red have become archetypes of female rebellion, referenced whenever people want to talk about women breaking gender barriers. This cultural immortality is ironic given that you probably died in obscurity, unknown and unmarked. You failed in your lifetime to achieve lasting freedom or security, but your story survived and grew into legend that outlived you by centuries. Let's examine what happened to Calico Jack and the rest of your crew in detail, because their fates contrast with yours. Jack and the male crew members are tried in November 1720 and convicted quickly. There is no pregnancy to plead, no legal technicality to delay execution. They're sentenced to hang. On the 18th of November 1720, they're taken to Gallows Point in Port Royal, Jamaica. Gallows Point is where pirates are executed publicly, their deaths serving as warning to others. A crowd gathers to watch execution is public entertainment, moral instruction, and community ritual all at once. The condemned men are brought up one by one. Each is given a chance to speak final words. Most either say nothing or offer some variation of repentance or defiance. Jack's final words, if he spoke any, aren't recorded. He is hanged along with the others. Hanging in the 18th century is brutal. The drop isn't calculated to break the neck cleanly. Instead, the condemned person strangles slowly, body thrashing, face turning purple. Death can take several minutes. Watching someone strangled to death is horrifying, which is partly the point. The horror deters others from piracy. After death, some of the bodies are tarred and hung in iron cages, gibbets, at the entrance to Port Royal Harbour. The corpses remain on display for months or years, slowly decomposing until they're just bones in cages. This extended display serves as ongoing warning to arriving ships. This is what happens to pirates. Jack's body is probably gibbeted. You visit him in prison before execution, deliver your allegedly cold final words about fighting like a man. Whether you feel grief, satisfaction, contempt, or complex combination of all three is unknown. Jack was your escape route from a bad marriage, your partner in piracy, your sexual partner. But he also failed you at the moment of capture, hiding below deck while you and Mary Red fought. The male crew members' deaths are straightforward. Crime, capture, trial, execution. Your fate is complicated by gender, by pregnancy, by the legal system's inability to process female pirates in the usual way. According to historian Dr. David Cordingley, pirate executions were elaborate public rituals designed to reinforce social order. The condemned pirate represented chaos, lawlessness, rejection of authority. The execution demonstrated that authority would ultimately prevail, that order would be restored, that transgression would be punished. Your survival or disappearance disrupts this narrative. You are the chaos that escapes punishment, the transgressor who slips through the system's fingers. Now let's talk about the specific legal status of women under maritime law, because this affected how you were prosecuted. Admiralty law. Maritime law generally treated women as less legally responsible than men. Women were assumed to be under coverture, legally subordinate to fathers or husbands, not fully independent legal actors. This created a problem when prosecuting women for maritime crimes. Could you be held fully responsible for piracy if you were legally subordinate to Calico Jack? Some legal arguments suggested you might have been acting under his compulsion, therefore less culpable. But the evidence showed you were enthusiastically willing participant, sometimes more aggressive than the male crew. The court couldn't maintain the fiction that you were a passive victim. The legal system resolved this contradiction by treating you as exceptional, a woman so depraved that she transcended normal feminine limitations to become fully criminal. You were prosecuted as if you were male, held to male standards of responsibility, but your gender was still emphasized to show how unnatural you were. This legal double bind affected all women who committed traditionally masculine crimes. They were simultaneously treated as less responsible because female and more depraved because gender transgressing. The legal system wanted to punish them, but couldn't quite fit them into existing categories. According to legal historian Dr. Cynthia Harrup at USC, early modern English law struggled with female criminals who didn't fit domestic crime patterns. Women who committed murder, robbery, or other violent crimes created cognitive dissonance. They were acting like men, which challenged the legal assumption that women were naturally gentle and passive. Courts often emphasized these women's gender transgression as part of the criminality itself. Let's examine the physical evidence of your existence, because surprisingly little material proof survives. There are no confirmed portraits of you from life. The images that appear in books are either entirely invented or loosely based on generic female pirates. You left no letters, no diary, no personal writings. Your voice comes to us entirely through others' accounts, trial testimony, third-hand stories, sensationalized histories. The trial records from Jamaica do survive, preserved in the National Archives in London and in Jamaican archives. These documents prove you existed, were tried, were convicted, pled pregnancy, but they tell us only what the legal system chose to record, not your inner life or personal perspective. Calico Jack's pirate flag allegedly survives in museums, the famous skull and crossed swords design that might have been his. But there is no physical object we can definitively trace to you, no weapon you held, no clothing you wore, nothing material that proves you were here. This absence of physical evidence is typical for working-class people in the 18th century, especially women, especially criminals. The material culture that survives is mostly from wealthy people who had possessions worth preserving. Pirates like you owned almost nothing, some clothes, weapons, perhaps a few coins or trinkets. When you were captured, any possessions were confiscated or sold. Nothing was preserved as historically significant because nobody knew your story would matter centuries later. According to material culture historian Dr. Laurel Thatcher Ulrich at Harvard, the historical record is deeply biased toward people who left material remains and written records. Working-class women like you are massively underrepresented because you left so few traces. We know you existed. but we know very little about the material reality of your daily life. Let's examine the psychological profile of women who chose gender disguise and piracy, because there is a pattern worth understanding. You need certain personality traits to maintain gender disguise successfully. High tolerance for risk, comfort with deception and ambiguity, ability to perform convincingly under sustained scrutiny, physical courage, willingness to use violence, comfort with masculine social norms, and rejection of feminine ones. You probably scored high on traits that psychologists call openness to experience and disagreeableness. You were open to unconventional experiences, willing to try things outside normal social patterns. You were disagreeable in the sense of being contentious, not particularly concerned with social harmony or others' approval. These traits would be adaptive for piracy, but maladaptive for conventional feminine life. You probably had some early experiences that shaped your willingness to transgress norms. Maybe childhood trauma, maybe witnessing violence, maybe just a temperament that didn't fit conventional expectations. Something made you different from other women who faced the same constraints but chose to conform rather than rebel. Modern psychology would probably classify some women, like you, as having personality disorders. Antisocial personality disorder for the violence and lack of empathy, borderline traits for the impulsivity and intense relationships. But this is problematic because it pathologizes what might be rational adaptation to terrible circumstances. Calling you mentally ill for refusing to accept an oppressive system implies the system was fine and you were the problem. According to personality psychologist Dr. Sarah E. Hill at Texas Christian University, people who resist social norms often have specific personality traits: higher sensation seeking, lower harm avoidance, stronger need for autonomy. These traits can be adaptive or maladaptive depending on context. In a rigid oppressive society, they might lead to criminality. In a more flexible society, they might lead to entrepreneurship or innovation. Now let's talk about the women who knew your story and were inspired or horrified by it, because legends shape behavior. After Johnson's book was published, literate women across the Atlantic world could read about you, and Mary read. Some were horrified. You were cautionary tales, examples of what happened when women rejected proper feminine roles. Others were fascinated. You represented possibility, proof that women could do anything, men could if willing to pay the price. Probably some women read your story and made different choices because of it. Maybe some chose gender disguise, inspired by your example. Maybe others chose to conform, frightened by your fate. Your story became a cultural reference point for debates about gender, freedom, and women's capabilities. The fundamental question your story raises is, were you exceptional, or were you ordinary women in exceptional circumstances? Did you have special traits that most women lack, or did you simply have opportunities and desperation that most women didn't experience? The answer is probably both. You had certain personality traits that made gender disguise and piracy possible for you: courage, aggression, risk tolerance. But you also had specific circumstances: illegitimacy, bad marriage, access to maritime world through geography, that created both need and opportunity. Millions of women in history had the same personality traits but no opportunity. Millions had similar circumstances, but not the personality to exploit them. You had the unusual combination of both. According to historian Dr. Margaret Lincoln at the Royal Museum's Greenwich, stories of exceptional women like you are both inspiring and limiting. Inspiring because they prove women can do things society says they can't. Limiting because they're framed as exceptions, implying that most women can't or shouldn't try to do these things. The challenge is honoring your exceptionalism, while recognizing that systemic change requires more than exceptional individuals. Let's examine the final months of Mary Read's life in prison, because her ending is documented while yours isn't. Mary is imprisoned in Port Royal after conviction, pregnant or claiming to be pregnant. waiting for birth that might never come. The prison conditions are brutal hot, overcrowded, unsanitary. Prisoners are chained. Food is minimal. Disease is rampant. Mary has survived battles, storms, years of hard maritime living, but prison breaks her in ways piracy didn't. According to the death record, she dies of fever in April 1721. The fever is probably typhus or some other disease spread by poor sanitation and overcrowding, or possibly childbirth fever if she actually gave birth and died of infection afterward. She is buried in Jamaica, probably in an unmarked grave in the burial ground near the prison. No monument, no marker, nothing to indicate that this is the grave of a woman who lived as a man for decades, fought in wars, survived as a pirate. She disappears into the earth, forgotten except as a sensational story in books. Mary's death raises questions about your survival. You are in the same prison, facing the same conditions. If Mary dies of disease, why don't you? Maybe you have a stronger constitution. Maybe you are lucky. Maybe you are actually released or escape. Or maybe you do die in prison, but the death isn't recorded or isn't preserved in archives. The uncertainty is maddening but revealing. Women like you left minimal traces. Your lives were considered unimportant, except when they provided titillating stories or moral lessons. The bureaucratic machinery that carefully recorded property transfers and elite births and legitimate marriages didn't bother recording the death of an illegitimate former pirate woman in a colonial prison. You didn't matter enough for careful record keeping. According to archival researcher Dr. Molly Walsh at the University of Pittsburgh, colonial records are full of gaps, especially regarding marginalized people. The archives preserve what authorities thought mattered: tax records, land transfers, criminal trials of significant cases. But routine deaths, especially of criminals or poor people, often went unrecorded or records were lost. Reconstructing your life requires reading between the archival gaps, making educated guesses about what happened in the silences. Let's talk about the modern legacy of your story, because you've become a symbol in ways you couldn't have imagined. You appear in novels, movies, television shows, video games, graphic novels. You are a Halloween costume, a board game character, a tattoo design. You've been claimed by feminists, by queer activists, by historians, by pirates enthusiasts, by everyone who sees in your story something they want to celebrate or understand. Some portrayals are relatively historically grounded. They engage with the real difficulties and violence of your life. Others are pure fantasy. You become a sexy pirate in a corset, more male fantasy than historical figure. The real Anne Bonny, desperate and violent and complicated, gets lost somewhere between historical record and cultural mythology. There is something ironic about a woman who specifically rejected being looked at, who disguised herself to escape male attention, becoming an object of fascination and fantasy. You wanted to be invisible as a woman, to access male privileges through anonymity. Instead, you've been made hypervisible as a woman, your gender emphasized in every retelling. But perhaps there is also something appropriate about your story surviving when you yourself disappeared. You lived on your own terms as much as circumstances allowed. You escaped the domestic trap, had adventures, fought and stole and sailed. You may have died in prison, but you also may have escaped and lived free somewhere else. The historical uncertainty allows for hope that you somehow made it, somehow survived to old age under a new name, carrying secrets to the grave. According to cultural historian Dr. Claire Anderson at the University of Leicester, historical figures who disappear from the record often become especially powerful cultural symbols because their ambiguous endings allow people to project whatever meaning they want onto the story. You become whoever the audience needs you to be. Feminist hero, cautionary tale, queer icon, adventurer, victim, victor. The real you is lost, but the symbolic you has remarkable staying power. Now let's examine Nassau in detail, because understanding the Pirate Republic helps explain why you chose this life. You are arriving in Nassau, Bahamas, around 1716. The harbour is packed with ships, sloops, brigantines, captured merchant vessels flying pirate flags. The town is a chaotic mix of temporary shelters, taverns, and warehouses. There is no formal government since the British governor fled in 1706 after Spanish, French raids destroyed the settlement. Nassau has become a pirate republic by default. An estimated 1,000 to 2,000 pirates use it as a base, along with several hundred permanent residents who survive by servicing the pirate economy: tavern keepers, prostitutes, fences who buy stolen goods, ship repairers, provisioners. The population swells and contracts as pirate crews come and go. The town itself is rough. Most buildings are wooden shacks or tents. The streets are muddy, filled with garbage and human waste. There is no sanitation system, no clean water supply beyond a few wells. Disease is rampant. Yellow fever, malaria, dysentery kill people regularly. But there is also incredible freedom. No one enforces laws about proper behaviour. Women can walk alone without male escort. People of different races mix freely. Sexual behaviour that would be prosecuted elsewhere is ignored here. The economy runs on stolen goods. Pirates sell captured cargo to merchants who ask no questions. These merchants then sell the goods to legitimate traders who transport them to colonial markets. It is an underground economy that connects to the legitimate Atlantic trade system at multiple points. Everyone profits. The pirates, the Nassau merchants, the colonial traders, even some corrupt colonial officials who take bribes to look the other way. You, Anne Bonny, find Nassau liberating. You can drink in taverns without being labelled a whore. You can wear what you want. You can speak freely, curse, fight, gamble. Your relationship with Calico Jack is openly sexual, and nobody cares that you left your husband for him. This is a place where normal rules don't apply, where you can be yourself without constantly performing respectability. According to historian Dr. Colin Woodard, Nassau during its Pirate Republic period, 1715 to 1718, represented an alternative social order where traditional hierarchies were flattened or inverted. Former slaves could become pirate captains. Women could access male privileges. Class distinctions that were rigid elsewhere were more fluid. This didn't make Nassau egalitarian or utopian. It was violent, disease-ridden, unstable, but it offered freedoms that legitimate colonial society denied to marginalized people. Let's examine the pirate articles in detail, because pirate ships operated under democratic constitutions that were radical for their time. You are joining Calico Jack's crew, and before you sail, the articles are read aloud, and every crew member must agree to them. These are the ship's laws, voted on by the crew and binding on everyone, including the captain. A typical pirate articles might include provisions like Article I, every man shall have an equal vote in affairs of moment and equal title to fresh provisions, or strong liquors seized, and may use them at pleasure unless a scarcity makes it necessary for the common good that a retrenchment may be voted. This means democratic decision making and equal sharing of food and drink. On merchant or naval ships, captains and officers get better food. On pirate ships, everyone eats the same rations. Article the 2nd, every man shall be called fairly in turn by the list on board of prizes, but if they defraud the company to the value of even $1 in plate, jewels or money, they shall be marooned. This establishes a system for distributing plunder fairly and severe punishment for theft from your own crew. Pirates were fine with stealing from outsiders, but had zero tolerance for stealing from each other. Article the 3rd, none shall game for money, either with dice or cards. Gambling often caused fights that disrupted crew cohesion. So many crews banned it. Article IV, the lights and candles should be put out at 8 at night, and if any of the crew desire to drink after that hour, they shall sit upon the open deck without lights. This reduced fire risk ships were made of wood and tar, and fire at sea was deadly. Article V. Each man shall keep his peace, cutlass and pistols at all times, clean and ready for action. Everyone was required to maintain their weapons and be ready to fight. Article VI. No boy or woman to be allowed amongst them. If any man shall be found seducing any of the latter sex and carrying her to sea in disguise, he shall suffer death. This is the article you are violating by being on board. The prohibition against women was standard, though enforcement varied. Article 11. He that shall desert the ship or his quarters in time of battle shall be punished by death or marooning. Cowardice in combat was unforgivable. This is the article Calico Jack violated when he hid below deck during your capture. Article the 8. None shall strike another on board the ship, but every man's quarrel shall be ended on shore by sword or pistol. Disputes had to be settled formally through duels, rather than shipboard fighting that could spiral into chaos. Article 8X. No man shall talk of breaking up their way of living till each has a share of £1,000. If any man shall lose a limb or become a cripple in their service, he shall have compensation from the common stock. This established a profit goal and disability compensation, a form of insurance that was revolutionary for the era. Article X. The captain and quartermaster shall each receive 2 shares of a prize. The master gunner and boatswain 1 1/2 shares. All other officers 1 1/4, and private men 1 share each. This shows pay distribution. Pirate ships had much flatter pay scales than merchant or naval ships, where officers might make 10 to 20 times what common sailors earned. These articles created a functional democracy. The captain was elected by the crew and could be deposed by majority vote if he was incompetent or tyrannical. The quartermaster, also elected, represented crew interests and could veto the captain's decisions outside of combat. Major decisions: where to sail, whether to attack a particular ship, how to punish rule breakers, were put to crew vote. This democratic structure was pragmatic. Pirate crews were composed of men and occasional women who had fled authoritarian naval or merchant ship hierarchies. They wouldn't tolerate tyranny from their own captains. The democracy also made crews more effective. Members were invested in success because they had voice in decisions and equal stake in profits. According to political historian Dr. Marcus Rediker, pirate ships represented an early form of democratic organization that was far more egalitarian than contemporary legitimate governments. At a time when only property-owning men could vote in most societies, pirate crews practiced one man, one vote democracy, regardless of class or race background. Now let's examine what daily life looked like for an average woman in the 18th century Atlantic world, because understanding what you escaped makes your choice more meaningful. You are a woman born around 1700 in Ireland or the American colonies. Your day begins before dawn. You wake in a bed you probably share with siblings or servants, in a house that is cold if winter, or stifling if summer. There is no running water, no indoor plumbing, no electricity. Your first task is rekindling the fire. You carefully blow on last night's coals, add tinder and kindling, build up a fire that will be used for cooking and heating all day. This is skilled work. Fire management is essential to household function, and failure wastes scarce resources. Next, you need water. If you are rural, you walk to the well or stream, carrying heavy wooden buckets back to the house. If urban, you might buy water from a water cellar or fetch it from a public pump. Either way, it is heavy labour. All the water your household uses for cooking, cleaning, and drinking must be manually carried. Breakfast is simple bread, maybe some cheese or salted fish, small beer, weak ale. You prepare this while also managing the fire, watching small children, and beginning the day's other tasks. You don't sit down to eat. You eat while working. The rest of your day depends on your class and location, but typically involves endless domestic labour. Spinning thread, weaving cloth, sewing clothes, mending torn garments, preparing food. grinding grain, kneading bread, cooking meals over the fire, cleaning, sweeping floors, washing dishes and pots, scrubbing laundry by hand in cold water, caring for children, tending small animals, chickens, maybe a pig or goat, maintaining a kitchen garden if you have space. If you are working class, you probably also do paid labour, domestic service, laundry for wealthier families, selling goods at market, textile, work like spinning or lace making that can be done at home. Your wages are a fraction of what men earn for comparable work. Everything you earn legally belongs to your father, if unmarried, your husband, if married. You have no privacy. You live and work in close proximity to family members, servants, neighbours. You are never alone. Every action is observed and judged against standards of proper feminine behaviour. Your clothing is restrictive, multiple layers, shift, stays, corset, petticoats, gown. The stays compress your torso, restrict breathing, limit movement. Your skirts are heavy and cumbersome, making running or climbing impossible. Your shoes are impractical for anything beyond walking on relatively even surfaces. You are literally dressed to be decorative and immobile rather than functional. Your education is minimal. If you are wealthy, you might read and write basic English, perhaps know some French, have accomplishments like music or needlework. If you are working class, you are probably illiterate. You are taught that intellectual pursuits are unfeminine, that women's minds are suited only for domestic matters. Your sexuality is completely controlled. Premarital virginity is essential to marriageability. You are chaperoned whenever in mixed company. You are taught that sexual desire is sinful, that sex is a duty owed to husbands, not a source of pleasure. Pregnancy and childbirth are constant threats. No reliable contraception. Maternal mortality rate around 1 to 2% per birth. If you have 8 pregnancies, not unusual, you have roughly 8 to 16% chance of dying from childbirth complications. Marriage is your expected destiny and economic necessity, but marriage means legal subordination. Your property becomes your husband's. You can't sign contracts or conduct business independently. Your husband has legal right to moderate correction, beating you as long as he doesn't cause permanent injury or death. Marital rape is a legal impossibility because wives are legally obligated to sexual availability. If you are one of the lucky few who never marry, your options are limited. You might become a servant, working for board and tiny wages. You might enter a convent if Catholic and can afford the dowry. You might live as dependent in a relative's household, serving as unpaid governess or companion. Economic independence is nearly impossible. This is the life you are escaping when you choose piracy. Yes, pirate life is brutal and dangerous, but it offers possibilities this conventional life denies: physical freedom, economic independence, adventure, power, escape from domestic servitude and compulsory reproduction. According to women's historian Dr. Bridget Hill at the University of Essex, 18th century, women's lives were characterized by grinding domestic labor, severe legal and economic disabilities, and minimal personal autonomy. The restrictions were so comprehensive that any escape required either exceptional circumstances or extreme measures. Piracy was an extreme measure. Let's examine a specific raid in more granular detail, because understanding the violence makes the transgression more real. You are participating in a raid on a merchant sloop in October 1720. It is late afternoon. Your crew has been tracking this sloop for hours, waiting for the right moment. The merchant vessel is small, lightly armed, carrying trade goods between Jamaican ports. Calico Jack gives the order. Your ship closes the distance rapidly. As you approach, Jack runs up the pirate flag skull and crossed swords on black background. This is psychological warfare. The flag warns the merchant that resistance will be punished with death, but surrender will likely mean survival. Many merchant crews surrender immediately rather than fight. This crew doesn't surrender fast enough. Jack orders a warning shot. The cannon roars, deafening even though you expected it. The cannonball splashes into the water near the merchant ship's bow. Smoke and sulphur smell fill the air. The merchant captain still hasn't struck his colours. Maybe he is brave, maybe foolish. Maybe he doesn't understand how serious this is. Jack orders another shot, this time aimed to hit. The cannon crew adjusts aim, fires again. The ball smashes into the merchant ship's stern, splintering wood, probably injuring or killing someone aboard. Now the merchant captain surrenders, striking his flag. But Jack is angry about the delay. When you board, it won't be gentle. Your crew swings grappling hooks, pulling the two ships together. You are in the first boarding party. You've bound your breasts, dressed in men's clothing, armed yourself with cutlass and pistol. Your heart pounds. This is the dangerous moment. If the merchant crew fights back, you could die in the next few minutes. You jump across the gap between ships, land on the merchant deck. Other pirates land around you, shouting, weapons drawn. The merchant crew cowers, maybe 10 sailors, unarmed, terrified. Smart of them. Fighting would be suicide. Your job is to secure the prisoners. You wave your pistol at a group of sailors huddled near the mast. Move and you die. You growl in your practiced low voice. They don't move. Good. Other pirates are searching the ship, breaking into the hold, finding whatever cargo is valuable. You hear shouting from below deck. They found something good. Bales of tobacco, barrels of sugar, maybe some rum. Not a fortune, but enough to make this raid worthwhile. The merchant captain is brought on deck. He is middle-aged, dressed better than his crew, terrified but trying to hide it. Jack questions him about cargo, about other ships in the area, about whether he is carrying money. The captain answers quickly, trying to cooperate, trying to survive. One sailor makes a break for it, trying to jump overboard. Stupid. Another pirate catches him, slams him against the mast, holds a knife to his throat. Jack walks over, evaluates the situation. He could kill the sailor as punishment and warning to others, but he doesn't dead men tell tales in port. And Jack wants a reputation for mercy toward those who surrender. He orders the sailor tied up instead. Your crew spends maybe 20 minutes stripping everything valuable from the merchant ship. Cargo, spare sails and rigging, the captain's personal possessions, any food or drink they're carrying. The merchant crew is left with a damaged ship, no cargo, and their lives. They're fortunate. Some pirate crews are more violent. As you sail away, you feel exhilaration mixed with residual fear. You participated in violent robbery. You threatened people's lives. You stole goods that represented someone's livelihood. And you feel alive in a way domestic life never made you feel. This is why you do it. Not because you are evil or because you enjoy hurting people, though maybe you do, a little. You do it because the danger, the action, the power, the freedom is the only thing that makes you feel fully human. According to piracy scholar Dr. Arne Bielashevsky at the University of Trier, most pirate raids in the early 18th century, Caribbean, followed this pattern. Intimidation through flags and warning shots. Quick surrender by outgunned merchants. Relatively efficient plunder with minimal violence. Pirates preferred quick, easy captures over prolonged fights that risked casualties. The violence was real but usually controlled. Enough to terrify victims into compliance. Not enough to make every raid a bloodbath. Now let's examine the specific medical realities of being a woman in disguise on a ship, because the health challenges were significant. You are dealing with menstruation in an environment with no privacy, no sanitation, and constant physical labour. Modern menstrual products don't exist. Your only option is cloth rags, pieces of old fabric, or clothing cut into strips. When you feel your period starting, you take several rags and fold them into a pad-like shape. You position this in your undergarments, basic linen drawers or nothing. and hope it stays in place. It doesn't have adhesive or fastening, so it shifts as you move, especially during active ship work or combat. You might rig some kind of belt system to help hold it in place, but this is improvised and uncomfortable. The rags absorb menstrual blood until they're saturated, then they leak. You are probably dealing with blood-soaked clothing regularly, on a ship where water is scarce and laundry facilities are non-existent. Cleaning menstrual rags is nearly impossible. You either have a limited supply that you try to rinse in seawater, which doesn't really clean them, and reuse, or you have to discard them overboard and use new ones, which requires a constant supply of spare cloth. The physical sensations are managed without modern pain relief. Menstrual cramps, back pain, headaches. You endure these while doing hard physical labour. Your breasts might be tender, making the breast binding even more painful than usual. You might feel fatigued or emotional, but you can't show weakness or rest without risking questions. The smell is a concern. Menstrual blood has a distinct odour, especially in hot Caribbean climate. You are hoping the general stench of an unwashed ship and unwashed bodies masks your menstrual smell. You might use strong-smelling substances, tobacco, tar, rum, to disguise it. If your period is heavy or irregular, you might experience bleeding through your clothing. This is catastrophic for maintaining male disguise. You have to constantly check for visible blood, change rags frequently, and hope no one notices. On a crowded ship where you are working in close proximity to others, this is intensely stressful. There is also the emotional and psychological burden. Every month, your body reminds you that you are female in a context where being female is forbidden. Your biology becomes an enemy to be managed, hidden, controlled. This creates disconnect from your own body. You can't fully inhabit your physical self, because doing so would expose you. According to medical historian Dr. Sarah Reid at Loughborough University, early modern women managed menstruation with extreme difficulty, even in domestic contexts with better resources. Women on ships in male disguise faced additional challenges that made menstruation a monthly crisis. Many probably experienced irregular periods due to poor nutrition and physical stress, which paradoxically helped with disguise even as it indicated poor health. Let's examine the specific testimony from your trial in detail, because the exact words reveal how you were perceived. You are standing in the courtroom in Spanish Town, Jamaica. The prosecutor calls Dorothy Thomas, who was aboard a merchant schooner your crew attacked in September 1720. Dorothy testifies, "I was on board a schooner that was taken by a pirate vessel commanded by one Rackham. Among the pirates were two women, and I knew them both a considerable time. They wore men's clothes, and at all times were very active in the piracies. When the pirates came aboard, these two women were among the first aboard. They had each a pistol and cutlass and cursed and swore at the men, threatening to kill anyone who did not surrender immediately. I particularly noted the red-haired one, that is you, Anne, who seemed more fierce and cruel than the other. She struck one of our sailors with the flat of her cutlass when he was too slow in obeying orders." This testimony is damning. Dorothy is establishing that you were actively, enthusiastically violent, not a passive victim of Calico Jack's compulsion. The detail about striking the sailor is particularly bad. It shows you initiating violence, not just participating in it. Another witness, Thomas Dillon, testifies, "When the pirates attacked our vessel, I observed two persons who I later learned were women dressed in men's apparel. They were as active and aggressive as any of the male pirates. They did not act like persons who were forced or unwilling. Rather, they seemed to take pleasure in the violence and robbery. One of them, the taller one with dark hair, that is Mary Red, held a pistol to my head and told me she would blow my brains out if I did not reveal where the captain kept his money." Again, this shows active participation and willingness. Mary threatened to kill someone. This isn't consistent with the defense argument that you were forced into piracy against your will. A French sailor named Peter Cornelian gives the most dramatic testimony. "These women were more bloodthirsty than the men. When some of the crew wanted to show mercy to prisoners, the women argued for killing them. The red-haired one said we should throw the prisoners overboard to drown. The dark-haired one urged the men to be bold and show no quarter. I feared these women more than I feared Rackham. Whether this testimony is accurate or exaggerated is unclear. Cornelian might be telling the truth, or he might be sensationalizing to make the story more dramatic. But his testimony establishes a narrative. You weren't just pirates, you were exceptionally cruel pirates. Your gender transgression was compounded by exceeding even male pirates in violence. The prosecutor uses this testimony to argue that you are unnatural women who have completely abandoned feminine nature. He says, "These creatures have rejected all that is proper to their sex. They have put on men's clothing and men's violence. They have become something monstrous, neither fully woman nor truly man, but rather devils in human form. Their crimes are compounded by their sex, for they have violated both divine law against piracy and natural law against their own feminine natures." This prosecutorial language reveals the deep anxiety your existence creates. You are not just criminals, you are category violators who challenge the fundamental organizing principle of society. The legal system needs to destroy you not just for what you've done, but for what you represent. According to legal scholar Dr. Linda Colley at Princeton University, early modern courts prosecuting women for traditionally masculine crimes often emphasized gender transgression as aggravating factor. The crime was worse because a woman committed it because women weren't supposed to be capable of such violence. This created legal double bind. Women got harsher moral condemnation, while sometimes receiving lighter sentences because legal systems still infantilized women as less responsible agents. Now, let's talk about the women who avoided piracy but lived similarly transgressive lives through other means. Because you and Mary weren't the only ones seeking escape. There were women who cross-dressed as soldiers, women who ran away to sea as legitimate sailors, women who became highwaymen, women who joined criminal gangs, women who simply disappeared from their communities and started over elsewhere with new identities. There is Christian Kavanagh, also known as Christian Davies or Mother Ross, who served in the British Army as Christopher Welsh for years. She enlisted to search for her husband who had been impressed into the army. She found him, served alongside him without him recognizing her, and continued serving even after his death. She fought in multiple battles, was wounded several times, and was finally discovered when severely wounded and needing medical treatment. Unlike you, she was treated as a patriotic curiosity rather than a criminal because she served the state. There is Mary Lacey, who served in the Royal Navy as William Chandler from 1759 to 1771. She worked as a shipwright, a skilled trade that required years of training. She maintained her male disguise for 12 years, living and working among men in extremely close quarters. She only revealed her sex after completing her apprenticeship and qualifying as a skilled shipwright, at which point she petitioned for a pension. Her pension application, preserved in naval archives, is one of the few first-person accounts of long-term female-to-male disguise in the 18th century. There is Margaret Buckley, Dr. James Barry, who lived her entire adult life as a man and became a distinguished military surgeon in the early 19th century. Barry attended medical school, graduated, served in the British Army Medical Corps for decades, and was only discovered to be anatomically female at death. Barry performed the first successful caesarean section in Africa, pioneered improved sanitary practices in military hospitals, and achieved professional success impossible for openly female physicians. Whether Barry identified as male was transgender in modern terms, or was a woman pragmatically accessing male privilege through disguise, is debated by scholars. These women show that gender disguise was a recurring solution to the problem of female restriction in the 18th and early 19th centuries. Some, like you, used disguise to access criminal opportunities. Others used it to access military service, skilled trades, or professional careers. All were escaping the limitations of legal femininity. According to historian Dr. Julie Wheelwright at City University London, the number of documented cases of female-to-male cross-dressers in the 18th century likely represents a tiny fraction of actual cases. Most women who successfully maintained lifelong male disguise died without ever being discovered, their true sex never recorded in historical documents. We only know about cases where disguise was discovered through injury, death, or voluntary revelation. Let's examine the specific conditions in the Port Royal prison where you and Mary Red were held, because understanding your final months requires knowing what you endured. Port Royal Prison is a stone building near the harbour, deliberately placed where arriving ships can see it. A warning about English justice. Inside, it is hot, dark, overcrowded, and filthy. You are chained. Leg irons connect your ankles with a short length of heavy chain that makes walking difficult and running impossible. This prevents escape attempts. The irons rub against your skin, causing sores that become infected in the unsanitary conditions. You probably have open wounds around your ankles that never properly heal because the irons are never removed. You are kept in a common cell with other prisoners, men and women mixed together, no segregation. The cell is maybe 20 feet square, holding 20 or more prisoners. There is no furniture, no beds. You sit or lie on the stone floor. There is one bucket for waste, shared among all prisoners, emptied irregularly. The smell is overwhelming. Human waste, sweat, infection, death. Food is minimal bread and water, maybe thin gruel provided once or twice a day. The portions are designed to keep prisoners alive but not healthy. You are constantly hungry. You probably lose significant weight during your imprisonment. The malnutrition makes you more susceptible to disease. Water is scarce and often contaminated. You drink from the same bucket as 20 other prisoners, never knowing when it was last filled or how clean it is. Waterborne diseases, dysentery, typhoid spread rapidly in these conditions. There is no medical care when prisoners get sick. They either recover on their own or die. Mary Red's fever is probably typhus, spread by lice in the overcrowded, unsanitary conditions. Once typhus enters a prison, it spreads rapidly because everyone is in close contact and everyone has lice. The symptoms are horrific: high fever, headache, rash, confusion, sometimes delirium. Mary probably suffers for days or weeks before death, conscious enough to know she is dying, unable to get any relief or comfort. You watch Mary die. You can't help her. You probably can't even ease her suffering because there is no medicine, no clean water, nothing. You just watch another prisoner's body being removed from the cell, carried out for burial in an unmarked grave, and you know you might be next. The psychological impact of imprisonment is severe. You've lived your life outdoors on ships with ocean horizon visible. Now you are enclosed in stone walls, never seeing the sky except through small barred windows. You've lived with physical freedom to move and act. Now you are chained, confined to a small space, unable to run or fight or escape. You probably experience what we'd now recognize as trauma symptoms: hypervigilance, nightmares, dissociation. But there is no concept of mental health treatment. You are expected to endure, and if you can't, if you break down, no one cares. Prisoners' psychological suffering is irrelevant to the system that is holding you. According to prison historian Dr. Claire Anderson, 18th century colonial prisons were death traps. Disease killed more prisoners than execution did. Conditions were deliberately harsh as part of punishment, but they were also simply neglectful. Colonial authorities didn't invest resources in prisoner welfare. Survival through months of imprisonment required robust health and significant luck. Mary Red had neither. Now let's examine what pleading the belly actually involved in legal and physical terms, because the process was more complicated than just claiming pregnancy. When you and Mary Red claimed to be pregnant, The court must verify these claims before granting delays of execution. This is done through a jury of matrons, 12 women, usually midwives or married women with children, who are sworn to examine you and report their findings to the court. You are brought before the matrons in a private room. You must strip naked while these strange women examine your body. They look for signs of pregnancy, swollen belly, breast changes, visible fetal movement if you are supposedly far along. They palpate your abdomen, trying to feel a fetus. They ask when you last menstruated. They ask about morning sickness, quickening, feeling the fetus move, other pregnancy symptoms. This examination is humiliating and invasive. These women are strangers, appointed by a court that is trying to execute you. They have no particular sympathy for you. They're probably respectable women who view female pirates as abominations. They probe your body, discuss your anatomy, make judgments about your credibility. The examination is also medically unreliable. In the first trimester, pregnancy is difficult to confirm by physical examination alone. Many of the signs they're looking for, missed periods, nausea, breast tenderness, can be faked or can result from other causes. Even in later pregnancy, some women don't show much. An experienced faker might be able to convince the matrons she is pregnant when she is not. Or you might actually be pregnant. You've been sexually active with Calico Jack, unless you were using some form of contraception, which in the 18th century means withdrawal, which is unreliable, or various herbal abortifacients, which are dangerous. Pregnancy is likely. Pirates didn't have access to reliable contraception any more than other 18th century people did. If you are truly pregnant, this creates complex emotions. A pregnancy that might save your life also means eventually giving birth in prison in terrible conditions, possibly dying in childbirth, and either keeping a baby in prison or giving it up. There is no good outcome. The matrons report to the court that both you and Mary Red are pregnant. The court accepts this finding and postpones execution. Under English law, execution must wait until after birth and recovery period. The unborn child is innocent and can't be executed for the mother's crimes. This creates a loophole that many female prisoners exploited. Get pregnant in prison consensually or through rape. Both happens, delay execution until birth. Hope that by the time you've recovered from childbirth, authorities have lost interest in executing you or some other factor intervenes. It wasn't a perfect escape strategy, but it was better than immediate hanging. According to legal historian Dr. Sarah Butler at Ohio State University, pleading the belly was a genuine legal protection that saved many women from execution. But it also created perverse incentives where imprisoned women sought to become pregnant, and prison officials sometimes facilitated or exploited this. The practice reveals how gender and reproduction created legal categories that could be manipulated by desperate women with few other options. Let's talk about the specific skills you needed to function as a sailor, because piracy required maritime competence, not just combat skills. You need to know basic seamanship, how to handle ropes and rigging, how to raise and lower sails, how to steer, how to navigate. These aren't skills you are born with, they're learned through practice. Managing sails requires understanding wind, sail shapes, and rope systems. A sloop like Calico Jack's has multiple sails, mainsail, jib, possibly top sails. Each sail is controlled by multiple lines, ropes. Raising a sail means coordinating pulling on multiple lines in correct sequence while the sail fills with wind. Lowering a sail means carefully releasing lines while managing the flogging canvas so it doesn't tear or knock someone overboard. It is physically demanding work that requires strength, coordination, and practice. Steering requires feel for the ship's movement. The tiller or wheel controls the rudder, but there is lag between your steering input and the ship's response. You have to anticipate, to feel how the ship is moving through the waves, to understand how wind direction affects steering. Good helmsmen develop almost instinctive sense for this. Bad helmsmen cause the ship to wallow and lose speed. Navigation requires mathematics and astronomy. To know where you are at sea, you need to calculate latitude north-south position using the sun or stars. This requires a cross-staff or quadrant to measure angles, knowledge of astronomical tables, and ability to do the calculations. Longitude east-west position is harder. Accurate chronometers don't exist yet, so longitude is estimated by dead reckoning, calculating based on speed and direction travelled. This requires constant monitoring and calculation. Most pirates probably weren't skilled navigators. That was specialised knowledge, but you need enough basic competence to understand what the navigator is doing, to recognise when a course makes sense, to participate in decisions about where to sail. You also need weather sense ability to read clouds, wind shifts, sea conditions. A storm can kill everyone aboard if you are not prepared. You need to recognise warning signs, specific cloud formations, swell patterns, barometric pressure changes indicated by aching joints or instruments, and know how to prepare, reducing sail, securing loose items, possibly seeking shelter. Maintenance skills are essential. Ships leak constantly. You need to know how to pump bilges, how to use tar and oakum to seal leaks, how to splice damaged ropes, how to repair torn sails. A ship that isn't constantly maintained will sink. All this technical knowledge has to be learned, practiced, maintained. You probably learned some from Calico Jack, some from other crew members, some through trial and error. The learning process involved failures, ropes pulled wrong, sails torn, mistakes made. But you learned because incompetence at sea kills you. According to maritime historian Dr. Marcus Rediker, pirate crews included men with wide range of sailing experience. Some were experienced sailors who could navigate and handle complex rigging. Others were relatively unskilled, but willing to learn. Successful pirate ships required enough skilled sailors to function effectively, but they could carry some less experienced members who learned on the job. You probably fell somewhere in the middle. Not expert navigator, but competent enough to handle basic sailing tasks. Now let's examine the specific moment of your final appearance in the historical record, because this is where your story becomes uncertain. It is the 28th of November, 1720. You are brought from prison to the courtroom for sentencing. You've been convicted of piracy. The judge pronounces sentence of death by hanging. This is the moment when you should hear the specific date and time of your execution, when you should be taken back to prison to await death. Instead, you speak up, "My lord, I plead my belly." The courtroom erupts in noise, spectators shocked, judges conferring. This is irregular but not unprecedented. The judge orders the jury of matrons assembled. You are taken to a side room for examination. The 12 women examine you. They probe your belly, ask invasive questions, discuss your body as if you are not there. You maintain composure because showing emotion might undermine your claim. After deliberation, they report back to the judge. Yes, this prisoner is with child. The judge accepts the verdict. Execution is postponed. You are taken back to prison. You've bought time, maybe months, maybe longer. What happens next is unknown. The historical record goes silent. The last definitive documentation of Anne Bonny is this court record from the 28th of November, 1720. After that, nothing. No execution record. No record of giving birth in prison. No documentation of release or escape. You simply vanish from history. The theories about what happened are speculation. Maybe you died in prison like Mary Red, and the death simply wasn't recorded. Prison deaths of convicted criminals weren't always carefully documented, especially if disease rather than execution was the cause. Your body might have been buried in an unmarked grave, forgotten. Maybe your father, William Cormac, bought your freedom. He was wealthy, he had connections, and despite disowning you for marrying badly, he might have intervened to save you from hanging. There are unverified stories that he paid a bribe or called in favours to get you released. You might have been transported back to Charleston, kept hidden, living under another name in respectable obscurity. Maybe you escaped. Port Royal Prison wasn't a maximum security facility. Escapes happened, with help from outside friends, former crew members, sympathetic parties. You might have gotten out. You could have fled to Spanish territory or a remote island, living out your life as a fugitive. Maybe you were pregnant, gave birth in prison, recovered, and by that time colonial authorities had moved on to other concerns. The political will to execute you might have dissipated. You might have been quietly released, or simply allowed to leave, with officials happy to forget about the embarrassing case of the female pirates. Any of these explanations is possible. None can be definitively proven or disproven. You become Schrodinger's pirate, simultaneously dead and alive, imprisoned and free, obscure and legendary. The historical ambiguity is frustrating for researchers, but somehow fitting for someone who spent their life existing in ambiguous spaces between genders, between legal and illegal, between conventional and transgressive. According to archival researcher Dr. Chris Lane at Tulane University, the colonial Caribbean records are full of these frustrating gaps. People appear in the historical record for their trial or their crime, then vanish without further documentation. The archives weren't designed to track individuals comprehensively. They recorded what authorities thought mattered at the moment, then moved on. Reconstructing lives from these fragments requires accepting that many questions will remain unanswered. Let's talk about the specific Caribbean ports that welcomed pirates because Nassau wasn't the only refuge. There is Tortuga off the coast of Hispaniola, which had been a pirate haven since the 1640s. By your era, it is past its peak, but still a place where pirates could resupply and sell stolen goods. There is Port Royal, Jamaica, which ironically transitions from pirate haven in the 17th century to centre of anti-piracy operations by the 1720s. The same harbour that once welcomed pirates now hangs them. There is Ocracoke in North Carolina, where the famous pirate Blackbeard operated until his death in 1718. There are countless small islands and hidden harbours throughout the Bahamas and Lesser Antilles where pirates could anchor, careen their ships, beach them for repairs, and avoid authorities. These ports create a shadow economy where legitimate and illegitimate trade intersect. Merchants who wouldn't openly deal with pirates nonetheless buy stolen goods at discount prices. Colonial governors who officially oppose piracy nonetheless accept bribes to look the other way. The line between legal privateering, licensed piracy against enemy nations, and illegal piracy is deliberately blurred. You move through this world of grey areas and moral ambiguity. Port towns where everyone knows what you are but nobody officially acknowledges it. Trading posts where stolen goods are fenced through multiple intermediaries until their origin is obscured. A whole economic and social system built on plausible deniability. The Caribbean in the early 18th century is a frontier zone where European colonial powers Britain, Spain, France, Netherlands compete for territory and resources. Piracy thrives in the gaps between these competing powers. Pirates raid ships from one nation while using ports controlled by rival nations. They play European powers against each other, exploiting diplomatic tensions and weak enforcement. According to Caribbean historian Dr. Carla Pestana at UCLA, the early 18th century represents the last gasp of the Caribbean's pirate age. After 1720 coordinated colonial efforts, British Navy patrols, unified anti-piracy laws, pardons for pirates who surrender, harsh punishment for those who don't gradually suppress large-scale piracy. Some pirates accept pardons and retire. Some are captured and hanged. Some flee to other regions. The Indian Ocean, the African coast, where piracy remains viable. Your timing is unlucky. You become a pirate just as the window for Caribbean piracy is closing. 10 years earlier, you might have had a longer career. 10 years later, piracy would be nearly impossible. You are caught in the transition. captured in one of the last major anti-piracy operations in the region. Now let's examine the psychological impact of watching your entire crew hang while you survive, because this must have been traumatic. You are in prison when Calico Jack and the male crew members are executed. You might hear about it from guards or other prisoners. You might even be able to see or hear the execution if the prison is close enough to gallows point. You know these men. You sailed with them, fought alongside them, shared danger and stolen loot. Some you probably liked, some you probably hated, but they were your crew, your community. Now they're dead and you are alive. And the reason you are alive is your female biology. The one thing you spent months trying to hide or transcend. The guilt might be overwhelming. Why do you survive when they don't? You weren't less guilty. Testimony showed you were as active in piracy as any male crew member. You don't deserve mercy more than they did. Your survival is arbitrary, based on your anatomical capability for pregnancy rather than any moral or legal distinction. Or maybe you don't feel guilt. Maybe you feel relief and triumph. You outsmarted the system. You used the one advantage your female body gave you, reproductive capacity, to escape the death penalty. You are alive, and they're dead, and survival is what matters. Morality is a luxury for people who aren't facing execution. Most likely you feel a complex mixture of emotions: guilt, relief, grief, triumph, fear about what comes next. You are processing trauma in a situation where there is no support, no counselling, no healthy outlet. You are alone in prison watching Mary Red die, not knowing if you'll be executed later or somehow escape. Jack's death might hit especially hard if you loved him, or might be satisfying if by the end you resented him for hiding during the capture while you fought. Your final words to him, if he had fought like a man, he need not have been hanged like a dog, suggest contempt, but emotions are complicated. You can simultaneously despise someone's cowardice and grieve their death. According to trauma psychologist Dr. Judith Herman at Harvard, survivors of situations where others died often experience complicated grief mixed with survivor guilt. They question why they survived when others didn't, even when their survival was chance or circumstances beyond their control. Without modern understanding of trauma and without access to mental health support, you would process these emotions alone, probably developing what we'd now recognize as PTSD symptoms that you'd carry for the rest of your life, however long that was. Let's examine the specific fate of other captured pirates from Calico Jack's crew, because you weren't the only survivor. A few crew members aren't executed immediately. They might have had useful skills, or testified against the others for lenient treatment, or had other circumstances that delayed execution. Eventually, most are hanged, but the timeline varies. There is George Featherstone, who testified against other crew members and received a pardon. He survives by betraying his fellows, accepting the shame of informant status in exchange for his life. Whether he thrives afterward or lives in ostracized poverty is unknown. There is John Davis and Thomas Bourne, who were pressed into piracy, forced to join the crew and successfully argue this at trial. They're acquitted on grounds that they weren't willing participants. This shows that forced into piracy defense could work if you could prove it, but proving it required evidence of resistance or unwilling participation that you and Mary Red couldn't provide. The rest, Calico Jack, Richard Corner, John Davies and several others whose names are recorded, hang in November 1720. Their bodies are gibbeted as warning to other pirates. Over months and years, the bodies decompose in their iron cages, flesh rotting away until only skeletons remain, still hanging at the harbour entrance. This is the fate you escaped. Your female biology saved you from decomposing in a cage, from being public spectacle of colonial justice, from having your death used as propaganda against piracy. Whether your actual fate was better dying of disease in prison or living in hiding and fear is debatable, but at least you weren't gibbeted. According to piracy historian Dr. David Cordingley, the practice of gibbeting executed pirates was designed as psychological deterrence. The sight and smell of rotting corpses was meant to horrify arriving sailors and potential pirates. The bodies were deliberately placed at harbour entrances where they'd be maximally visible. The practice was effective propaganda but also reflected the era's casual relationship with death and corpses. Public execution and display of bodies was normal, almost entertainment. Now let's talk about the women who remained in conventional marriages, despite wanting escape. Because for every woman like you who chose piracy, thousands chose to endure domestic life they hated. They're the silent majority, the ones whose quiet desperation isn't recorded in trial transcripts or sensational histories. You are a woman in Charleston, married to a man you don't love, bearing children you didn't want, managing a household that feels like a prison. You hear stories about Anne Bonny, how she ran off with a pirate, how she sailed and fought like a man, how she escaped all the constraints you are living under. What do you feel? Maybe envy. She did what you wish you could do. She escaped. She is free in ways you'll never be. You imagine what it would feel like to wear men's clothes, to fight, to sail, to be nobody's wife or mother or servant. Maybe contempt. She is a criminal, a disgrace, a woman who abandoned propriety and will pay for it with her life. She represents everything you've worked to avoid. Scandal, social death, literal death. You've made the smart choice to conform, to survive within the system, rather than fight it and lose. Maybe fear. If women like Anne Bonny exist, if they can successfully perform masculinity and reject feminine roles, what does that say about the supposedly natural and inevitable nature of gender roles? If she can be a pirate, what other supposedly impossible things might be possible? Probably you feel a complicated mixture of all these emotions. You might silently root for Anne even while publicly condemning her. You might tell yourself you'd never do what she did while secretly knowing that under different circumstances, you might have made the same choice. Anne Bonny becomes a story whispered among women, cautionary tale, inspiration, impossible fantasy. Different women interpret the story different ways depending on their own situations and desires. But all of them think about it, about what it means that a woman did this thing women supposedly couldn't do. According to women's studies scholar Dr. Claire Hemmings at LSE, historical figures who transgressed gender norms become sites of cultural contestation. Different groups claim them for different purposes. Conservatives as cautionary tales, progressives as heroes. With the historical person themselves lost under layers of interpretation, you become whatever people need you to be to make sense of their own relationship to gender and freedom. Let's examine what alternatives you might have had if you'd lived in a different era or place, because context matters enormously. If you'd been born a century later, you might have had access to early feminist movements, women's education, employment opportunities that didn't require gender disguise. If you'd been born in certain indigenous American cultures with more flexible gender roles, you might have had recognized social categories for masculine women. If you'd been born wealthy instead of middle class, you might have had resources to live independently, without marriage, but you were born in the wrong place and time Atlantic world, early 18th century middle class background. Your options were genuinely as limited as they seemed. Marriage, prostitution, poverty, or disguise and crime. These were the real choices available to a woman who didn't want conventional domestic life. The tragedy isn't that you chose piracy. It is that piracy seemed like the best available option, that your society was so restrictive, so intolerant of gender diversity, so unwilling to make space for women who didn't fit the domestic mold, that violent crime offered more freedom than legal life could. Modern readers might judge you for the violence, for participating in robbery and terror, but what alternative would you propose? What legitimate path should Anne Bonny have taken that would have given her the autonomy, adventure and freedom she wanted? If you can't identify a realistic alternative, then maybe the problem isn't Anne's choice, but the system that made piracy her best option. According to social historian Dr. Amanda Vickery at Queen Mary University of London, We must judge historical figures within their own context, while also maintaining ethical standards that transcend context. Yes, piracy was wrong. Robbery and violence harm real people. But Anne Bonny's choice to become a pirate was rational response to oppressive circumstances. Both things are true. She is simultaneously victim of system that gave her no good options and perpetrator of violence against innocent people. Historical complexity requires holding both truths together. As we approach the end of this journey, let's reflect on what your story teaches us about gender, freedom, and the prices people pay for living authentically. You chose piracy not because it was a good life, but because it was better than your alternatives. You chose violence and risk over domestic safety because that safety came with total subordination. You chose possible death by hanging over certain death by slow domesticity. Modern people living in relatively free societies might struggle to understand this calculation. Why not find a middle path? Why not compromise? But you didn't have middle paths. The 18th century Atlantic world didn't offer women compromises between total subordination and total rebellion. You chose rebellion, and it cost you everything, but it also gave you years of freedom that conventional life would never have allowed. Your story is about the brutality of gender constraints, about the lengths people will go to escape systems that suffocate them, about the courage it takes to live authentically when authenticity is criminalized. You are not a simple hero. You committed real violence, caused real harm, made choices that hurt others. But you are also not a simple villain. You were responding to a system that gave you no good options, that punished women for being human, that demanded total conformity or promised total destruction. We honor your memory not by romanticizing piracy or violence, but by recognizing the conditions that made piracy seem like freedom, by fighting for a world where people don't have to choose between their authentic selves and their survival, by making space for gender diversity, for women's autonomy, for everyone to live without needing disguise or rebellion to access basic human freedoms. You chose the gallows over the kitchen. You chose death over slow suffocation. You chose to be yourself, violently and completely, for as long as you could. The world killed you for it, or imprisoned you, or you escaped and lived in hiding. We don't know which, but you were free in ways most women of your era never experienced. And that freedom, however brief and brutal, mattered. Sweet dreams, and may you wake tomorrow with gratitude for the freedoms you have, with compassion for those throughout history who fought for freedoms we take for granted, with commitment to building a world where no one has to choose between authenticity and survival. The pirate queens chose the gallows over the kitchen because those were the only choices they had. May we create a world with better choices. Remember Anne and Mary and honor their memory by living freely and fighting for others' freedom too. Good night.